Welcome, Keith Ippel, to Tersaus once again. It's a pleasure having you in our small podcast studio here. I hope you had a good flight because you came only yesterday. Hope you're not too tired.
Yeah, I came in last night and actually I feel fantastic. So thank you for asking.
Awesome. I'm sure a lot of dev community in Sarajevo knows you very well through your work with MLP, but maybe for general public, given the fact that our podcast is not listened only by the developers, but also a lot of business people and people from outside of the tech community. Maybe introduce yourself in a couple of sentences about your work at Spring. And
love
everything.
to do that. Yeah, I always love to talk about Spring. So I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, and I run Spring, and Spring exists to change the world through innovation. So we love to work with entrepreneurs and investors that are trying to make the world a better place. First time that I came to Sarajevo was in December of 2016. And so I've had a chance to work in the ecosystem. I originally came through the Swiss Entrepreneurship Program, part of Swiss Contact. And through them, I met Ministry of Programming and Ferris and Rashad and Amra and the whole team. And so I've had a chance to work in the community ever since. It's been pretty incredible. We run incubation, acceleration, corporate innovation, investor training, capacity building. And so I'm actually in town for the Tech Boost Investor Summit this week.
Last time you were here, we were talking about different challenges of building a startup community, building this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it seems that in only 2 months or 3 months since you've last been here, things are kind of going in the right direction, because the last time you were here, we were discussing about how there is no ecosystem. And we talked about challenges of building it and how to integrate everything. But the conference that you've mentioned, I think I saw somewhere that already have 40 angel investors signed up for the conference, which is actually quite a big number. So maybe can you give us a little bit of insight into your perspective of the Bosnian ecosystem and the startup world here, because maybe it differs from what I see it, because from my perspective it seems like it could be a lot better, but maybe I'm looking from a kind of a darker angle because I'm.
Well, you know, there's a saying, right? The grass is always greener on the other side. And so I think every ecosystem that I've seen follows a similar path, you know, from, you know, kind of the dawn when people want to build an innovation ecosystem to when it is a vibrant ecosystem. And so when I first came to Sarajevo back in December of 2016 and had a chance to go to Mostar and Banja Luka at the same time, you know, it really was at the very beginnings. And so you had a few organizations that were starting to support, a couple of incubators. You had some outsourced development shops, but it was pretty small, right? And so over the last 5 years, as someone who kind of leaves and comes back on a regular basis, but is away for a couple months at a time, a little bit easier for me on the outside to see the progress. And so I think a few things that I would highlight is you have some, you know, outsourced development shops that have grown dramatically. You also have some innovation there. So for example, Ministry of Programming, which is focused on developing and growing startups specifically and not just outsourced dev. Really, really good example. There's a couple of vibrant programs that are running in Banja Luka right now, including Start, and Vlada is the person running that. Really, really great organization. In Mostar, you've seen some ups and downs over the last 5 years, but really kind of like now, I guess, sustainable innovation, if you will. Here, of course, Tersaus has been in town for a couple of years. You guys are growing dramatically. We have innovation programs like Foundation 787 running multiple programs, and then EFSA now sponsoring the Tech Boost program, which is actually the first regional accelerator program. It's also the first time that there's going to be this combination of an investor summit and investor academy. And so to give a sense, the investor summit is not only pulling people from within the community, but I know that, you know, myself from Canada, we have some folks from Europe. We also have one person coming in from Africa. You know, there's a really nice, diverse trend. And anytime you see investors or entrepreneurs coming from other parts of the world to do business here, that's always a sign of things moving in the right direction. You and I were talking before the start of the podcast about pressure right now on finding good developers.
Exactly.
Also a good sign of a growing ecosystem, right? Is that pressure. And so I think there's some good pieces happening. I think more developer education would make a huge difference. I think the other piece too is finding that bridge from people who have ideas to get them to first revenue. What we call the top of the funnel, that's going to be really important going forward. BH Telecom is doing some really interesting work in that area along with 787. And I think we need to see a bit more of that.
There's a bit of a paradox, if I may say. On one hand, you have companies, for example, like BH Telecom, who have a lot of money set aside to invest into different startups. And they complain that there isn't enough high-quality projects that they can invest to. But on the other side, you have a lot of people complaining that they have very good ideas which they cannot get funding for. So
Correct.
They complain there isn't enough cash flow, that the idea is not self-sustainable and things like that. So how do you approach this problem? Who needs to kind of start the first step?
I love that question. So first, great observation. Second of all, it's universal truth. Every ecosystem in the world, isn't it a funny thing that investors say there's not enough deals? And the entrepreneurs say there's not enough capital.
Exactly.
So here's what ends up happening. And for everybody, it is important to note that globally, there's more capital available for innovation than ever in the history of the world, period. There's more capital available in 2022 than there has ever been available before. Compound, right? Like there's a lot of capital out there. But when we look at investors, first, the challenge with investors is the allure of Facebook. And so what I mean by that is, say you and I are investors and we prefer to invest in digital media, social media, iOS-enabled companies focused on the Western Balkans. Maybe that's our kind of prime focus area. But nobody wants to miss out on the next Facebook. Yes. So they'll look at anything, right? So the premise behind this is what if? You know, it's like, yeah, sure, I'm focused on this type of investment, but what if that one could be the next Facebook? So what ends up happening is investors look at anything and then they get frustrated because nothing fits their model, and then they say there's no deals.
So you would say the problem is that both the investors and the entrepreneurs are trying to make a new Facebook, which is really hard because those are big shoes to fill.
Well, and maybe a little bit farther than that, right? So investors are hoping to invest in the next Facebook, whatever that may be. Now, entrepreneurs, when we sell our products and services to the market, to consumers and to businesses, we have a target audience, right? We're all taught that at the very beginning. You know, your product is not for everyone, it's for someone specific, right? And so the interesting thing is, as an entrepreneur, when it comes to our customers, we're willing to focus. But when it comes to raising money, we will literally talk to anyone who looks like they can write a check. Yep. So one example that I have, actually true story, I get off the plane last night, I have an email in my inbox from an entrepreneur in Canada, and they said, hey, Keith, would you introduce me to this investor? Now, the entrepreneur is in education. The investor, with their website, says, we only invest in clean tech. So then I said to him, I said, well, why do you want an introduction? They only invest in clean tech. And he said, well, you never know. And that is why entrepreneurs say there's no money out there, is because I'm, say, for example, an education entrepreneur. I go talk to a clean tech investor and they say, I won't invest in you. And then I say, there's no money. Well, that's not true. So the important part is, if you think about it from a marketplace perspective, capital raising is the most inefficient marketplace in the world. And the reason for that is because entrepreneurs will talk to anybody who can write a check and not focus on those people who invest in my industry. And investors will talk to anybody because they don't want to miss the next Facebook. That's the challenge, right?
I've been following closely. I'm not sure if you've been reading about it, about Theranos in USA.
Absolutely.
And I find it interesting how this quest for new Facebook or for new Apple in the case of Theranos, because Elizabeth was very trying to imitate Steve Jobs, the way she was talking on conferences, the way she was dressing and everything, and how the investors, just because of this reason that they thought she could be the next Apple, the next big thing, blindly invested into the company which basically didn't have a product for so long. And another also great example is, I'm not sure you know about a company called Njegova.
I've heard of it.
Which basically is the same thing. You have a guy who worked as a car salesman or something related to that, so no engineering background at all. And just because he named the company similar to Tesla, he introduced like this event where he tried to sell a hydrogen truck. And I think $60 billion worth of evaluation for a company ended up being a complete fake.
Yep.
Again, because the investors feared that they would miss on the next big thing and just blindly invested. So it's kind of an interesting thing.
Well, and there's something to be said about this process, because I think for all of you who are thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, you have to remember that investors are not ATMs, right? Like they're not bank machines, and it's about building a relationship. And so in building a relationship, the reality is ultimately that decision by an investor is an emotional decision. I look at you and I look at your team and I say, can I trust you to take care of my money, right? And bring me a return. And the interesting thing is, you mentioned Theranos, and I'm also going to mention WeWork. And
also a great example.
Yeah, and here's the difference. With Theranos, the investors unfortunately got unlucky because the tech was not there, wasn't real. They got lucky with WeWork because it was quote unquote just real estate. Like worst case scenario, WeWork has a bunch of leases and buildings, which anybody can wrap their head around, and you can do something with those leases and buildings.
It's something
right?
that you can see somewhere on the map.
So even though the entrepreneur ended up being a bit of a fake and maybe not the ideal entrepreneur to work with, at the end of the day, investors were trying to make that choice. Do I trust you and your team with my money? The best way to guarantee long-term success, though, as an entrepreneur is to go for revenue. And that's where if you can show a customer, and if you can show a customer that will pay and then pay again and again, the benefit then is not only investors can like you, and maybe sometimes in a misguided way like Theranos, but more importantly, they can start to look at your progress and your traction and say, oh, okay, like not only is this person likable and are they smart, but they hustle and they adapt and they can get to revenue. That's actually where you find the magic, the best relationships, I think, between an entrepreneur and an investor.
From my perspective here, big IT companies in Sarajevo specifically, they make quite a good revenue in terms of outsourced projects and everything, but it seems like we lack self-made products. Like there isn't a lot of, or as far as I know, maybe there's something in development which is it's still not public, but large IT companies who clearly have resources that they can dedicate into building something locally are not doing it. And it seems it's only because of the financial risk, so to say. It's highly likely that it's going to fail. 1 out of 10 might succeed, but they're not willing to take a risk. They take kind of the easy path of just doing the outsourced project for somebody else, and they kind of offload that burden of selling the product someplace else. So I feel like we're kind of lagging behind in this product development thing, so to say, which might be a bad thing for the future, because eventually there's always going to be somebody who is cheaper to do outsourced projects with. So I feel like it's not a long-term sustainable economy. Maybe I'm wrong, but I want to hear what's your opinion about it. How to persuade these large IT companies who have a lot of yearly revenue to invest 2-3% of their yearly income into developing and risking a little bit with their own product.
So first thing we want to do is we want to honor human nature, right? So human nature says, I do what I know, and I trust in what I know, and so I keep repeating that. So in other words, change has risk, and so for a lot of us, risk is bad, right?
Comfort zone is kind of...
Comfort zone is a good thing. And so the important part is first, it's not for everybody, but for those who are able to be proactive, there's tremendous power in that, because you start to, what I call, control your own destiny. So let's say, for simplicity's sake, you have an outsourced contract with a bank in Austria, and you're doing work. At any point in time, any combination of they decide to hire locally, they decide to go cheaper somewhere else, or the director who hired you gets transferred into another job and somebody else comes in and your contract's over. So when you have big outsourced clients, the challenge is that, you know, you're at risk because you can't control your own destiny. It's what we call the risk percentage, the percentage of revenue that you have that comes from a single client and the risk that that represents. So how do we get people to move? I think sometimes you want to look at other country examples like Vietnam is a good example. I think we could definitely put some other examples on the board, but in the case of Vietnam, a lot of outsourced dev shops. India actually is a gigantic example of this. And then at a certain point in time, the clients started to outsource elsewhere, including places like Bosnia. And so what happened is necessity was the mother of invention. Right? So in other words, my clients stopped working with me. I have developers. I better do something. So what you're advocating for is to be proactive, and I agree completely. The way that you de-risk it is you start by building apps and products that are successful elsewhere that can be replicated in the region. Right? Like that's the fastest way to get going. So a great example is BlaBlaCar, car sharing service in France. Great example is an entrepreneur in Canada looked at that and said, well, nobody's doing it in Canada. So he started Papa Ride. He had, I think, 400,000 users within 6 months. You know, a really great example of just copying what works well elsewhere and then bringing it here and leveraging the strengths that you have. So we were talking about mobile app development earlier, and then you say, well, what are those mobile apps that are really successful elsewhere that can be replicated locally? That starts to de-risk it a little bit and helps some of these great outsourced dev shops to spend a little bit of time and effort. You don't have to figure out the whole model. You don't have to figure out the whole architecture, right? Like you can look to the other examples, start to get comfortable with internal development, start to build some of those other capabilities in-house, like, you know, launch marketing and launch sales and those other pieces, and then build the momentum. And I think you're going to start to see that in the next 12 months in town. I think the noise that I'm hearing from the community is people are ready to step in. They have some confidence. They have enough capital. I think the important part for everybody is, say, pick a percentage, like say maximum 20% of profit or 15% of profit, and say that's what we're going to start to apply in a disciplined way. And with that kind of discipline combined with kind of that de-risking, I think you can see a lot of success.
There are actually a few examples of companies that did just like that. For example, in the early days of social media, we had a social platform here called dernek.ba, which sold for a lot of money. I think the company that sold that social media should write a book about the perfect timing to sell a startup.
Absolutely.
Because that was the moment when the Facebook was getting the momentum. And if they kept it for like 6 more months, the company wouldn't be valuable at all. But they sold it at just the right time.
Timing's everything.
And then they built pick.ba, which is now the largest site for selling stuff in Bosnia. Also a good timing. And then they also built korpa.ba, the food delivery service, 6 months before Global came to Bosnia, which is like they really had a smart approach, which is one of the rare things you see here. You know, people actually doing their research before. We kind of have a habit here of going blindly into something and then have a mentality, we'll figure out when we get there. But they actually did the research of what was successful at that particular time, what was trending in, for example, USA. For Korpa, it was a year ago, Uber Eats was like the most popular app in USA. So they figured, okay, it must come to Europe in a couple of months. We'll build the same product. Maybe Corona helped them out a little bit, kind of sped up the entire thing, but it was a right momentum. So they actually made quite a good business decisions, but just as you mentioned, they figured out what was successful outside and then adapted it to the local market. The same way that companies struggle to kind of jump into this product development, we also have a case where a lot of people with good ideas work in like a local company, and then they fear of becoming an entrepreneur. And then they feel unhappy because they are not satisfied with their own work. They feel like they could contribute more to the community. They could develop a product or a small company or something and then make it bigger, but they don't have enough confidence or enough resources or enough knowledge to go into that field because it's kind of a challenging industry. Maybe do you have some advice on people who have a 9-to-5 job and an amazing idea, but not enough confidence to jump into this entrepreneurial world?
Love that question. You know, in 2022, it's actually the ideal time to be in that situation, and I'll explain. If we went back to, say, 2015, the notion of, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I've got a full-time job now, what everybody would have said, quit your job, go be an entrepreneur. That's a huge risk.
Exactly.
And as you well said, right? A lack of confidence, lack of education. Lack of education leads to a lack of confidence, right? And then your question is my idea any good, right? So the big three questions are, is my idea any good? Second, will anybody pay for it? Third, do I really want to do this? Those are the big three questions that a person wants to answer. But entering 2022, we have this thing called a side hustle. And so side hustle, the benefit, I think, for people in Bosnia is the notion of people having, say, a couple of things on the go notionally is kind of a thing, right? Good. So then I think what people want to do is they first want to start off getting educated, in particular on customer discovery. So that research that you do to find out if anybody will, like if there's a problem to solve and if anybody likes your idea. Second, you want to get kind of educated on minimum viable product, launch plan, say startup sales and marketing. The benefit right now is there's a lot of first of all, incubator programs in the region. I mentioned 787 earlier and startup in Banja Luka. Like, so there's some programs that are running currently. I know there's one in Mostar and the name escapes me off the top of my head. It'll come to me. But the point is you can sign up for programs locally, or there's great online programs as well. And they're free. Like the online programs, you can just access that content. Fabulous. So what you want to do is do customer discovery. You want to talk to at least 30 potential customers. You can do this pre-9 a.m., during your lunch hour, at the end of the day. You can connect with people via email, etc. So you can start to test the idea. And then if the idea looks interesting, so in other words, do they like my idea? Yes. Now you can start to test if anybody's going to pay for it. And the way that we can test this is, for example, people signing up for mailing lists, people signing up for pre-orders or pre-launch. You can all the way go to generating revenue for pilots or for early proof of concept or early products, right? Great. So you can get all the way to there. Then you can answer the final question, which is, okay, I've been working from 9 to 5, my day job. Then from 5 p.m. to some later point in time, I'm working on my side hustle, which now starts to replicate what it feels like to be an entrepreneur, which is, I always call it, you know, you're working flex time. Start anytime before 8 a.m., anytime, end anytime after 8 p.m., right? And so the fun part is that, you know, you start to test this and say, do I want to work hard to create my own company, to hire my own staff, to build my own wealth, right? And if the answer to that question is yes, now you're ready to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And then the next step is set a deadline. Can be 3 months, can be 6 months, can be a year. Set a deadline when you're going to quit your job. As soon as you set the deadline, you know the amount of income you need to hit that deadline, and then you can build a plan to hit it. So that's the path that I would recommend. Absolutely.
There's a story about a company who developed Candy Crush. They're a mobile game development company. And I think I read somewhere that before Candy Crush, they had 90 games who they developed, published, people downloaded them, but none of them made any significant impact on the community. So the 91st game was actually a success, which kind of really sets a high bar on, you know, being persistent until you get your big break. But on the other hand, how do you know when your idea is not good enough? Like when do you decide, okay, the thing that I'm pushing for, it's maybe not the right time, the market is not correct, I'll switch to something else. So there's this sweet spot before giving up too early and then pushing too much.
Such a great question. I don't know if there's, like, I feel like if I had an answer to that question, I would be like a multi-billionaire, right? The reality is that you do have to feel it. So there are certain things. So for example, if you build an app and nobody downloads it. So there's a funny story, you know, crowdfunding like Kickstarter, Indiegogo. So crowdfunder, like a Kickstarter, if you run a Kickstarter campaign, all the stuff that you read out there says you start with your friends and family and you say, buy my stuff on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. True story, 27% of all crowdfunding campaigns raise $0. Those clearly need to be a no.
Yeah.
Right? Because your friends and family aren't even buying because they're your friends and family. Like it's that bad of an idea, right? But, you know, I think there's a few other things too. One is, you know, the market just says no. I'll give you another example. There was a company that I was working with in Canada, and they said, we went out into the marketplace and it was a business to business idea. And it was very local specific because of the nature of the service they were offering. And so they went out there and they said, good news, we identified 50 companies that would buy. And then I said, great, how much can they spend a year? And they said $5,000 each. And I said, great, that's $250,000. What are your expenses? And they're like, yeah, it's about $1 million. And I'm like, so
you're a little bit short.
You're a little bit short. And the reason is because the idea didn't scale.
Yep.
And so a couple things. One is sometimes people don't want to buy. Second, the market isn't big enough to justify the effort. And I think the third one is like, yeah, will people actually pay for it? So an example that I'll give you is I actually had an organization reach out to me recently, and they're running an education program, and they said, hey, we have an education program and we put it into the marketplace for $1,500, but nobody wants to pay for it. So we're thinking about dropping the price to $0, and we'll figure out a way to make money later. And I'm like, I'm not sure how you can make money later if the customer is not paying money today. And so the reality is it's always easier to lower price in the future than it is to raise the price.
Yep.
So, you know, the important part for me is I always look at it and say, I have a target audience. Are they willing to buy? Are they willing to use it? Second, are they willing to pay for it? And third, is that market big enough? Those tend to be the things that might cause someone to say, stop. Right? The important part though is you have to fully test it. So in other words, you can't talk to 3 customers. Like that's not enough. You got to talk to 75 or 100. Like you got to find out, right? Because sometimes the first 10 people you talk to are not the market.
Yep.
Right? They just have unique buying habits, right? Like some people like to buy orange sweaters. Some people like to buy black sweaters, you know, like it's kind of one of those things. And so you do have to test it out. And a fantastic example that I have is a company called Traveler Collective. When they started selling, they were selling to men. And it grew to about, like it wouldn't be unreasonable to say like, say $1 million, $1.5 million in annual revenue, but then it stopped, like it plateaued. And so then they're like, well, this might be it. And then that might head to no. But what happened is that in their kind of test to see if that was the limit, they started talking to women more, and they found out that a slight shift in their product would actually serve women. They doubled their revenue in 3 months. You know, so it's a good example of you want to take a look at the information and say, do I have everything? Have I tested everything? And if I have, then it's okay to say no. And one thing that I want to say is there's this culture in Silicon Valley, which I was a part of early on, and it's called the fail fast culture. And so the idea of celebrating failure. And I actually would argue now that's wrong. And I'm going to explain.
Okay.
I think failure is when you blindly go bankrupt. But if you start a company or you start an idea and you test it and you find out it's not going to work and you stop, that's called learning. Failure is bankruptcy because I was too pig-headed to stop.
You're burning money for no reason.
Burning money for no reasons. So I think what people want to get into is a learn fast culture. Test the ideas, talk to the marketplace, test if I can go to launch, test if I can work from like 9 a.m. to, 7 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and like kind of test my own kind of desire to like create my own thing, right? I think those are the places we get to play.
Talking about 2022 and maybe the last 2 years as kind of a unique milestone in majority of our lives, looking from a perspective of a freelancer, if I can say I'm a freelancer, it hasn't really affected me much. I was used to remote work. I was used to, collaborating online, managing everything remotely. But to a lot of companies who didn't have enough, they weren't used to it. Adjusting to this new normal, how they call it right now, was a very challenging time. It affected their business. They didn't know how to adjust, and generally they didn't do very well in terms of financial yearly income, whatever. From your perspective, it's been 2 years since the corona started, and things are now starting to get back to normal. Do you feel like we're going to continue with this remote approach, given the fact that it gives more opportunity for tech companies to hire talent globally? It puts pressure on local companies to compete with global companies. For example, even here in Sarajevo right now, a local IT company has to compete with, I don't know, GitLab, who is a fully remote company. And then me as a developer, I can choose if I want to work for GitLab, if I'm a good developer, GitLab or a local company.
Correct.
And if that is the case, given the trends that are globally, how can a smaller company compete with a larger one? Because we all know that a monopoly is never really a good thing. So you need like these small businesses, local small businesses. You need a local coffee shop somewhere. You cannot just have a big Starbucks chain everywhere, because then you lose this kind of local vibe. And given the recent trends that I've seen, it might be a very challenging thing to compete with.
Is it going to continue on, including remote and distributed work? Absolutely. Depending on the statistic you look at in North America alone, Canada and the US, there's somewhere between 2 and 5 million jobs that are tech that will need to get filled in the next couple of years. There's no way the North American job, talent market can fill it. So people are looking to places like Sarajevo to fill it. So what that means is, to your point, in Sarajevo and Bosnia, local smaller companies will need to compete. Good.
Yeah.
Because what it does is it creates world-class companies.
Yeah.
And so the important part for me is a couple of things happen. One is you want to offer people that which no other company can offer. And so one thing, say if you're a smaller company in Sarajevo, the first thing you can offer is a blend of remote work and in person. Right? So it's just down the street. Ministry of Programming has an office. And so there people can work from home and they can come in, they can have holiday parties together. They can, do learning together. I know, for example, they're going to be doing like an internal set of like pitch events and meetings this week. So that's a unique offer that GitHub can't offer, right? So that's kind of point number one. Second, the opportunity to offer some form of continuous learning. Right, so a lot of large distributed team businesses, you mentioned GitHub, Amazon, Facebook, others, the challenge is that you're one of tens of thousands of employees. And so how do you actually really get the type of learning and kind of personal growth that you're looking for? So I think for me, if I'm a small company, I'm going to say, first, I want to offer those things that are unique that other people can't offer. You can speak in your local language. You can come into the office. You can participate in local events and work from home. You can get unique professional development that is a little bit more tailored to you because we're not this big, nameless, faceless organization. And then I think the final component is this kind of quality of work idea and quality of team. And I always say that if I'm leading a business, there's 3 dials that I can use to impact how my team is feeling. So one is compensation, the second one is career path, and the third one is team, right? So if I can make each one of those dials work, right? So maybe it's not like the coolest, say, tech that I'm working on, but I've got a great career path and I've got an incredible team. Okay, that can make for a great job. So I think the important part for small businesses here is you want to say to yourself, what can I offer that's unique and different? And second of all, just know you're competing on a global stage. So you can't compare yourself to other companies in Sarajevo. You must compare yourself to companies in Berlin, in Stockholm, in London. And when you start to compare yourself there, what it does is it ups your game on the types of clients you go after, the type of work you're going to do, what you offer your team, and that changes the game. And I think that's actually where, if everybody wants to use Ministry of Programming as an example, perfect example, right? They started doing work immediately day one in Stockholm. That forced them to be world-class up front, and that allows them to build a world-class organization. And I think it's a great inspiration for any emerging tech company in Bosnia today.
Yeah, because then it forces other tech companies to follow their steps, because if they set high standards, then everybody else needs to follow, which kind of improves the quality of everything.
Yeah, and once you do that, not only are you a world-class organization in Sarajevo, but you're a world-class organization that is a leader in the region as well. And so then you start attracting people in the region, you start attracting people in country, and then suddenly your orbit grows. So it is a domino effect. And it's something I think everybody should be focusing on.
Yep.
Yeah.
One last question, because we're already talking 40 minutes.
Yeah, fantastic. Great.
Everybody's always on the lookout for the next big thing. Usually it comes from San Francisco or some region there. From my point of view, it seems that the trend in the next few years in the startup world is going to be circular economy and self-sustainable food startup market. But from your perspective, because you're more into this on a daily basis, do you have any other industries maybe that the people should focus on in terms of researching? Is it the electric vehicles? Is it too late for electric vehicles, or there's something like completely new coming up?
So there's a few things that I would jump to right away based on what I've seen. First, I think there's tons of room around mobile, remote, new education, right? So all things kind of like the future of education, mobile health, mobile and personalized finance. I'm not going to call it personalized banking, because that obviously requires the banking system to play, but I would say personalized finance is huge, right? Democratizing finance in new ways. Those would be areas that I would look at. Reducing plastic waste. You mentioned circular economy, but in particular, like sustainable food, healthy food movement. Another trend that we're seeing globally now, 2 years in on the pandemic, is definitely things like mental health apps, health and wellness apps. And then if somebody was saying, hey, I'm going to start something in say, I don't know, October of 2022 or February 2023, tourism is going to come back. And when it comes back, it's going to be flying. Yeah. Not now. Plan ahead, right? And start to look for some of those kind of signs and opportunities that exist. Yeah. Awesome.
Keith, it's been a pleasure having you here for the second time at our co-working space. We hope to see you again, I guess, in a couple of months.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm always back in the region. Really excited by what's happening here in the region and the people that are supporting it, like yourself and Ministry of Programming and 787 and Swiss Entrepreneurship Program and EFSA Finance in Motion, like just some amazing people building the ecosystem here. And I really encourage people to get involved.
Thank you. And for our observant viewers, as you might have noticed, I'm not Ivona, who usually hosts our podcast, who you've been probably expecting here. She will be back on the next episode. Make sure to follow our social channels for new episodes of terscast, and see you again sometime soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.